Good morning, everybody. This is another edition of the Pass Ball Show, brought to you by Pielli.com, as well as St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey. Coming off of a very impactful sports weekend, but in all honesty, when you look at Sunday, going into today, there really wasn't a whole lot going on. But obviously a weekend that started by Thursday with the Stanley Cup champion Washington Capitals, the Golden State Warriors finishing, which we all thought and knew was going to be inevitable on Friday. And then Saturday, you have the French Open and the big horse race, the Belmont Stakes. So pretty much after that, there's nothing really left to do. I mean, if you care about a little Subway Series, you had the Mets and the Yankees on Sunday night. And, you know, if you look from a national perspective, there probably wasn't a ton of people, you know, watching or tuning into that game. I mean, you had a sports day on Sunday, which was very, very slow moving and not very active. And listen, that happens when sports end up finishing their season. You have hockey season ending on Thursday, basketball season ending on Friday. And obviously you have the French Open, which is, you know, I'm going to talk about in a little bit. And obviously the big horse race coming on Saturday. So by the time Sunday comes, there isn't a whole lot of stuff going on in the world of sports. Like I said, unless you're a Yankee fan and you're hoping for some way that the Yankees could have finished off the sweep of the New York Mets, which I think they were very well expected and favorited to do. But that didn't happen. But we think of the Triple Crown as it applies to horse racing. And obviously, Triple Crown is obviously a big deal when it comes to baseball. And, you know, if we were looking at which one, per se, is harder to achieve, I think it would be a pretty good debate. Because you don't see it happen very often in baseball. And obviously, before, you know, it happened 3 years ago, it was something that almost went 40 years without happening. So you look at both occurrences. And obviously the Triple Crown in horse racing is winning the Kentucky Derby, the Preakness, and the Belmont Stakes, all within 5 or 6 weeks, however long it goes. And obviously in baseball, you're talking about a hitter winning the batting title, but also leading the league in home runs and runs batted in. And the reason why it's more of a big deal now to win the Triple Crown in horse racing than it is in baseball is because the stats and the analytics have changed the game and changed the way we perceive how well a player is doing. Now, judging an offensive player is something we've always done going back as far as we can remember in baseball history. And, you know, for those that were in generations before me and you, stats were the best way to judge whether a player was good or not. The difference now in 2018, we look at things such as OPS, weighted runs created, wins above replacement. And we try to factor in as much different variables and things that could be changed different to the way we used to look at numbers in baseball. So somebody goes out, Miguel Cabrera a couple of years ago, wins the Triple Crown, leads the league in batting average, home runs, and runs batted in. It's not going to get the same story that it would have when Carl Yastrzemski did it in 1967. Or Mickey Mantle did it, a couple times in the 1950s. When that happened, everybody was embracing how good the player was, and it was more of a celebration of how great and how solid and how good of an all-around player, whoever won the Triple Crown was. When Miguel Cabrera won it, you could have made a case that Mike Trout may have been the better player or may have been more warranted to win the most valuable player in the American League last year. Going back years ago when we were talking about the Triple Crown, it was different in a way where if somebody won the Triple Crown in baseball, that player was undeniably the best player in the sport, or should have won the MVP unanimously. So now we look at horse racing, and obviously the amount of times that there's been a Triple Crown, and we're looking at only the 13th time in the history of horse racing we've ever seen it. First time ever happened was Sir Barton in 1919, Gallant Fox in 1930, Omaha in 1935, War Admiral in 1937, Whirlaway in 1941, Count Fleet in 1943, Assault in 1946, Citation in 1948, and then we went a long time without having a Triple Crown winner in the world of horse racing. You're talking about 25 years before Secretariat won in 1973. Seattle Slew 4 years later in 1977, Affirmed in 1978, and then obviously the 37-year gap between Triple Crown winners in horse racing between Affirmed and American Pharoah in 2015. So Justify wins the Triple Crown, becomes the 13th horse ever to win the Triple Crown in horse racing. And in baseball, it's happened 17 times. But here's the issue. Here's the issue that I have with, and I've spoken about it for a couple minutes already. I tell you, finding a website on this computer sucks. The value of the Triple Crown in baseball is nowhere near what it used to be. So somebody that I can't believe I mean, how could you not find a list of Major League Baseball Triple Crowns? This is a friggin' joke. But the bottom line is that 17 times it's happened in baseball. And the value of it is nowhere near what it was before. Now, if you look at from the pitcher side, I do believe, wins, earned run average, and strikeouts are still a good enough way to describe how good a pitcher is. And I finally found it if you're ready to look at it. Last time it was done was 2012 with Miguel Cabrera. And I remember the debate being between Cabrera and Mike Trout to win the MVP. And if you look back years ago, you'd be like, the guy won the Triple Crown. How is it even a discussion who the most valuable player is? And of course, Carl Yastrzemski was the last Triple Crown winner before that in 1967. Frank Robinson in 1966, Mickey Mantle in 1956. Ted Williams won it twice, 1942 and 1947. Prior to that, Joe Ducky Medwick in 1937. Lou Gehrig in 1934. Chuck Klein and Jimmy Fox in 1933. Rogers Hornsby won it twice in 1922 and then again in 1925. Ty Cobb won the Triple Crown in 1909 with 9 home runs and 107 runs batted in. Prior to that, talking about Napoleon Lajoie in 1901, 14 home runs. Hugh Duffy in 1894 with the Boston Beaneaters in the National League. Tip O'Neill in 1887, and the first time a Major League Baseball player won a Triple Crown was Paul Hines, a center fielder for the Providence Grays in 1878, and he did it by hitting just 4 home runs. Now, in baseball, in regards to the pitchers, it's something that has happened a lot. starting with Tommy Bond in 1877, but most recently was done by Justin Verlander and Clayton Kershaw in 2011. Now, what Verlander did by winning 24 games was something we probably will never see again. But you've seen dominance in baseball, and I'll throw some random names that have won the pitching Triple Crown. And, you know, you look at Pedro Martinez, Roger Clemens, Randy Johnson, Johan Santana, Jake Peavy for the Padres in 2007. So we're looking at a series of pitchers who have done it. Lefty Grove won it twice. Lefty Gomez for the Yankees won it twice. Walter Johnson did it, twice. Hal Newhouser, 45 with the Detroit Tigers. Sandy Koufax 3 times. Steve Carlton, 1972. So to win the Triple Crown as a pitcher in baseball, and I'm not saying it's easy to do. I'm not saying that it's something that could be expected every year, but it happens a lot more often. But once again, getting to my point, when pitchers seem to do it, and we're looking at 7 years since somebody has done it in baseball, and prior to that, it was gaps of 12 years, 13 years. But for the most part, it's something that was done regularly, kind of on the average of about 10 years. Now you're looking at the Triple Crown as far as hitters in baseball, and it was something that would probably happen maybe every 15 or 20 years. Probably closer to every 20 years for a hitter. But once again, we're talking about OPS, weighted runs created, and wins above replacement. So if that becomes the new Triple Crown, then we'd have to have a whole new calculation of the stat and the amount of times that players have won it. But there's no value, or very limited value, of the Triple Crown from batting average, home runs, and runs batted in. So obviously we have another Triple Crown winner in horse racing, the 13th ever, would justify. It may be the most impressive Triple Crown that exists out there. Once again, John Pielli, Passball Show. Glad to be with you. Feel free if you want. You can comment on the Periscope feed or the Facebook Live feed. A couple things I did want to talk about. The French Open, which, was a tournament that I don't think gets a lot of attention in tennis. But I've spoken about the sports of golf and tennis. And golf, by the way, Dustin Johnson, that ridiculous eagle that he hit to end up winning the tournament yesterday was fantastic. But, I admit, when it comes to the world of sports, that I follow tennis and golf when it comes to the majors. So I found a little bit of interest in following the French Open. Of course, Rafael Nadal winning his 11th, which seems to be just an unbelievable feat for a guy that, doesn't seem to win other major tournaments. But when it comes to the French Open, it seems like his style of play when it comes to being able to do it on clay is just outstanding. Watching the French Open the other day, I watched the women's final, and Selena Halep from Romania wins her first major tournament, her first French Open, and kind of coming off of a heartbreak loss in the finals of last year, defeating American Sloane Stephens. And Sloane Stephens has moved up in the rankings, is now the 4th ranked women's tennis player, the highest ranked American women's tennis player. And that's significant because you think about the Williams sisters, and of course Serena just having a baby. She's been out for a while, and obviously it may perhaps take her a while to get back into the top of the tennis world. But she is no longer the top-ranked women's player. But not only that, but not only is no longer the top seeded American. Sloane Stephens gave you a good effort, but winning the first set. And if you watch this match go on, it seems like, Selena Halep just has the ability to dominate a tennis match. I mean, as hard as she was hitting the ball, the way that she was controlling the volleys as the match went on, I think gave me the impression, at least, that she would probably win 9 out of 10 matches against Sloane Stephens. And it's nothing to take anything away from Sloane Stephens. I thought she did a good job. She certainly got off to a good start by winning the first set. Was up 2-0 in the second set. Looked like she was well on her way. But of course, Halep wins. Now, I'm interested to see because, we're looking at a different generation of tennis players. And Selena Halep, ended up meeting, Justine Henin, who was a former player of my time back in the 1990s. And, we look at women's tennis and we don't really see that type of rivalry that used to exist when Steffi Graf and Monica Seles were playing. Going back a generation before, you had Chris Evert and Martina Navratilova. Before that, Billie Jean King. We haven't had that same type of dominance, and a lot of it is with the respect to Serena Williams because she has dominated the sport in her own right. She has dominated the sport to a point where she has not really had a rivalry. In fact, the biggest rival or the closest rival you could talk about that exists with Serena Williams is her sister Venus, but that's a media thing. That is the national media trying to make it out to be something bigger than it is. They're sisters, yes. They're going to have a sibling rivalry no matter what it is that they do. And the fact that they both play professional tennis together is a rivalry that's created more by the media than the actual rivalry between the two sisters. Serena has dominated the tennis tour. Venus was the more highly regarded of the Williams sisters when she first came out, as a teenager. Everybody was expecting her to kind of take the mantle as far as being that next big women's tennis player. And it never happened. And it never happened because, number one, Venus was a little bit of a disappointment. Of course, Venus won her share of tournaments. It's not like she's been a complete flop. But the way that Serena has dominated the tour and the whole, winning all these majors and becoming the face of women's tennis has kept it from being a rivalry. And what we haven't had really since the days of Steffi Graf and Monica Seles. We haven't had a rivalry that exists in women's professional tennis. And I think once that happens, the sport can continue to rise because I think you're seeing a good product on the court. Watching that finals of Halep and Stevens, those were two good tennis players in a match that could have gone either way, and it was entertaining to watch. The only thing that's missing is the rivalry. Moving on, I wanted to talk a little baseball, and I have a conspiracy theory as it exists in the world of baseball and how it applies to the New York Mets. And I said I wasn't going to go too nuts about, the Mets' performance on the baseball field, and I do believe they're cursed. If you listen to Joel Sherman, and I know Joel Sherman has written some pretty lousy columns in regards to takes on the New York Mets. He went out there the other day and he continues to be bashing his point home that Yoenis Cespedes is hated by the Mets fans. He's hated by the Mets. He's just such a bad person. And there hasn't been any evidence to really prove that. It's just a narrative that Joel Sherman and a couple of the other sports writers have continued to throw home and continued to repeat. And they figure if they've repeated enough times, the general public is going to start to believe it. You say something over and over again, and eventually people perceive it as a fact. You tell them that it's not a fact, but they say, hey, I heard it enough times, so it must be a fact. If Joel Sherman keeps writing articles about Yoenis Cespedes, making him out to be a bad person, a bad teammate, and just a terrible human being, people are going to start to believe that. But one thing that Joel Sherman wrote the other day that I kind of do agree with, and I do believe there is a little bit something to it, is the fact that the New York Mets could be getting into this quote-unquote curse territory. And I don't know if they're cursed per se as far as not being able to perform. I mean, they do seem to have to deal with a lot of injuries over each of the last 3 seasons. And I'm going to touch on that in a little bit. But if you think of the 1918 Boston Red Sox, won the World Series, Babe Ruth was their best pitcher, was an up-and-coming hitter. A couple of years later, he's dealt to the New York Yankees, and the Boston Red Sox never win a World Series again until 2004. It's 86 years. They have heartbreaks. They lose in 1946, 1967, 1975, and 1986. And then it all comes together in 2004, but a ridiculous 86 years have to go by. You can talk about the Billy Goat with the Chicago Cubs in 1908. A team that actually goes 71 years without getting to a World Series, let alone winning it. You think of the New York Rangers in hockey, who didn't win a Stanley Cup from 1940 to 1994. That's 54 years. And then you look at the Detroit Red Wings, who finally won a couple years later, had not won since 1954. You got the Cleveland Indians as they exist in Major League Baseball, having not won a World Series since 1948. Now I understand 1986 was not that long ago. And in fact, a lot of adults that are watching the program right now could say they remembered 1986. Could say it was just a number of a series of championships that New York sports teams have won. Obviously, the colorfulness and the playfulness of the franchise will always be remembered. It'll always be brought up when you talk about perhaps the greatest individual teams or single season teams in sports history. And Mets fans are probably frustrated. They're thinking 32 years have gone by since the last time they won a World Series championship. Now, it hasn't hit the territory yet that we could talk about it being a curse. But if you double it, fast forward to 2050, and the Mets still have not won a World Series championship, we're going to start talking about 1986 like it was forever ago. Talking about the franchise as if it's been cursed. Now, I don't know if it has been. You know, you look at, it seems to be, since that time, no matter what they've seemed to try to do as a franchise, has not worked out. That 86 team was supposed to last forever. It was a team that was supposed to win the first of a series of World Series championships. You got the unfortunate drug addiction and abuse problems of Dwight Gooden and Darryl Strawberry as we hit the halfway point here in the Pass Ball Show. Kind of derailing that. Strawberry leaving to go to the Los Angeles Dodgers. You got the worst team money could buy in 1992 when the Mets signed Bobby Bonilla, traded for Brett Saberhagen, brought in Eddie Murray. And maybe from an individual standpoint, it wasn't anything that any of these players did or didn't do individually. It was just their cohesion and the fact that the semblance of these players together were never going to work, and proved it on the baseball field. The Mets went through a rebuild after that. Brought in some younger players named Todd Hundley and Edgardo Alfonso and Ray Ordonez. Added some veterans like a Mike Piazza and a Robin Ventura and an Al Leiter. Got themselves to another World Series in 2000. But the problem with that is that was extremely unsustainable. That was not a team that was set like the 1986 team. That was a team that wasn't set like the New York Yankees, a team that was competing with them at that given time. This wasn't a series of young players that you could say they're going to be great and even better in the future. So you knew it was a matter of time before this team lost its edge. And getting to the World Series in 2000 was expected to probably be the most that franchise was going to do in a little while. Steve Phillips decides to put together the second worst team money could buy by trading for Roberto Alomar, trading for Mo Vaughn. Every deal that he made to put together a team for 2002 did not work. Set the franchise back for years. And it wasn't until Omar Minaya came in 2005 and decided to start spending money. Signed Pedro Martinez, Carlos Beltran the next year. Traded for Carlos Delgado. Signed Billy Wagner. Seemed to get the okay from the ownership and the head of the front office to make moves and be able to spend as much money as he wanted to. That got the Mets to within a break of the 2006 World Series. Pretty similar to the Yankees at the end of the 2017 season. Going to seventh game against the Astros. Losing tough, game decided by a run or two. Mets were considered favorites for 2007 and 2008. And by the way, 2009 Sports Illustrated had them on the cover as the team to beat going into the 2009 season. Well, we all know how those seasons turned out. And if it wasn't for the collapse of 2007, 2008 wouldn't have been considered a collapse. 2009 was an absolute disaster. And this was a team that had to turn itself around and go to rebuild. Sandy Alderson came in. They dropped their payroll considerably. They developed and built their team around a series of young pitchers. And it worked up to a point. It got them to the World Series in 2015. The Mets made the postseason again in 2016. Something they had only done one other time in the history of its entire franchise. And you see the team right